Do you want to hit an intro or do you want me to?
You know what? Why the hell not? I don't think I've ever done an intro
Yeah,
for
that's
us.
what I
I'm
think you
not gonna
should.
lie. I'm not gonna lie. All right, and this is possibly the single most important discussion of our careers, right?
Probably.
This is probably the height of both of our young, strapping lives, right?
I
And what we're
certainly hope
doing,
not.
that was the intro. Surprise,
Holy
surprise.
shit.
This is what we're doing. We're bebopping and scatting, as you said. And
hmm
I'm Tucker, and this is Abram, and we're here to talk about The Last of Us Part 2. This is a
My,
spoiler-filled discussion.
yes.
Turn this off if you have not beaten the game. Going in as blind as possible for this, even if you might have seen some spoilers from the original leaks, do not listen to this podcast. A lot of those are not actually as correct as they may seem.
Some of them are blatantly false because I got spoiled. I got spoiled, and they said stuff that just isn't in the game. So even if you think you got spoiled, you're probably not spoiled.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from the discussions that I've listened to. It's just that even if you saw something and you were like, "Oh, this is ridiculous," there's a solid 50 to 60% chance that it just is not, like someone just made that up, and then that's what made you mad, is the fact that someone made completely bullshit up.
Well, you know what, Tucker? I'm not mad because and I posted this on Twitter. I don't know if you acknowledge this because I say a lot of things you just tune them out because they're usually dumb. But The Last of Us Part 2, I've been playing video games for 15 years or a little bit more. I've played hundreds of games, a countless number of games from the NES to the Switch. I've played games across every PlayStation console, across every Nintendo system, a little bit of Xbox. The Last of Us Part 2 is my favorite game of all time.
I am not in that same boat. It is not my personal favorite game of all time. It's certainly up there, but I have gone on the record on maybe Twitter, probably Twitter, maybe our texts, definitely Twitter DMs and Discord servers, gone on record saying that I believe that this is that The Last of Us Part 2 is the peak of the video game industry. It is the best overall crafted video game that has ever been released. Now, I don't think that it's the best video game ever. I think that honor goes to Minecraft. But I think that the two of them can stand side by side as two of the greatest pieces of art in the medium.
I'm going to pretend you didn't say that so we can keep the discussion on topic
Cool.
because that's just a heinous thing to say. However, what's not a heinous thing to say is that The Last of Us, Naughty Dog's just so fucking good. From
Yeah.
the production value to the storytelling to the gameplay to everything, it's just very. I describe this game in three words. It's a very, it's a very confident game. It's an unrelenting game, and it's very bold.
hmm
And so I think that extends to the gameplay and the story. So do you want to start talking about the gameplay or the story?
Um, let's start with the gameplay because I would say, actually, I don't know. I was gonna say it's where the game is most improved, but I don't think I actually believe that. But anyway, let's talk about the gameplay. Either way.
I actually do believe that because here's the thing. I enjoyed The Last of Us. I played it really late. I didn't play it nearly when it came out. I think I played it like 2018.
Oh
Um,
wow. Oh, actually, I
I
remember that. Yeah, I remember
yeah
you playing that and be
yeah,
like,
it's out of the blue
you haven't played it yet?
because I loved Uncharted. I love all the Uncharted games. But I forever whatever reason I didn't get around to The Last of Us. So I played it and I enjoyed it, but it felt kind of I don't know expected at that point. Um, but the gameplay in Last of Us Part Two is improved basically in every way. It feels really powerful. I feel like everything's really weighty, and I think that's what's most impressive to me about it. Every combat encounter made me legitimately tense, and it's really people have talked about the violence in the game being like shocking. I don't think it's shocking. I don't think it's torture porn. What I think what's effective about the gameplay is that it's all very brutally presented in a non-cinematic way. Like you shoot somebody with Ellie's hunting rifle in the head and their face gets blown off.
Mhm.
So I think that I feel like I really connected with the gameplay because it actually felt like I was fighting for Ellie's life, for Abby's life, and legitimately, whenever I get caught by a fucking clicker and I die, I'd have to close my eyes because whenever they would rip the shit out of her neck, I couldn't
Yeah.
watch it more than twice. I just think it has a certain feeling of groundedness that The Last of Us Part One thought it had, and I thought it had until I played Part Two.
Yeah. And I think that's also where I come down the game. And I think the reason why I'm so impressed by essentially, if not all, every aspect of the game is that the first game was initially one of my favorite games of all time when I played it. I had it in my top 5 for a couple years. I have never fully replayed that game. And it's still a game that I really like, and I consider it one of my favorites, but it has certainly dropped over the years, and I don't even think I would put it in my top 10 anymore. But then when I played this game, I realized that, and I heard this comparison on the wonderful podcast PlayStation I Love You XOXO, hosted by Greg Miller and Blessing Adeoye Jr., where one Greg Miller from Kind of Funny said that Last of Us 1 is a crayon drawing, and Last of Us Part 2 is like a painting, right? You look at the design of the first game and how relatively linear, video game designy, like you can tell when there's going to be a combat area, things like that. The world is much more designed like a video game and formatted in a usually structured way. And then when you hit Last of Us Part 2 and the world opens up, the story is non-linear, characters are introduced, themes are tackled that have never been tackled in the industry before. It blows the first game out of the water where I don't even know if I want to ever replay the first game. I probably will at some point, but I don't even know if I can consider the first game one of my favorites anymore because the second one just makes it obsolete.
Now here's a question for you. Behind you, you have 3 posters. Is that middle poster a Last of Us poster?
It is, yeah.
That's fascinating.
There is Jack and Daxter, Last of Us, and BioShock.
You're gonna have to get a Last of Us 2 poster.
I don't know if they have that, but those two, Jack and Daxter and Last of Us, have the series titles on the poster, and BioShock says "Would You Kindly," which is not the name of the series, but it is part of the game.
Well, that was an entire non sequitur, and I probably completely destroyed your point, but I agree with what you said.
I do like The Last of Us, and we can cover these two because that's a cool Last of Us poster.
It's a very cool Last of Us poster, but I have to say, I agree with you completely. I was very impressed by how dynamic the world feels. Not only in terms of how it's designed, how you'd be walking down the street and all of a sudden you'd hear that goddamn Seraphite whistle, and then all of a sudden your life's about to end, or WLF soldiers would just walk somewhere. But I felt a real sense of dread because I didn't understand when I was going to get attacked or where. And I felt like in The Last of Us Part 1, you were fighting video game enemies. And I fought a lot of video game enemies. Even, I mean, I've played games that are supposed to be traditionally scary. I mean, last year's Resident Evil 2 remake is a traditionally scary video game. But nothing evoked the tension I felt at the thought of there being an encounter with the Seraphites or with the clickers or any of the infected. By the end of the game, the WLF, when I was fighting them, didn't scare me nearly as much as the other two.
Yeah.
But it's in the way that Naughty Dog made the enemy AI so realistic that I was afraid to fight them. And people talk about, like, oh, they shout out the names of the people you kill, and that's a nice detail, but that's not really what gets me. It's the way they move dynamically, and they follow, like, they are on a track, but it's so much harder to see it.
Yeah.
It's so much harder to keep track of where everyone is because they're not just clomping around so you can use listening mode and figure out where everyone is.
Yeah.
And you really have
You can use it a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's very fuzzy. Even like sharper upgrade it's not that much sharper.
Yeah, and the other thing that I love is, like, you shoot somebody in the leg and they drop and they grab your leg, right? Or their leg, not my leg. I grab my leg at several points in the story, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But just little things like that, or when you hit somebody with a fucking pipe and you feel it, it's just, I don't think combat has ever felt as realistic and so by extension as horrifying as it has in The Last of Us Part 2. And aside from one moment that I think we're going to touch on, I don't know, I think we disagree about it, but there's one fight in the game where you're in the basement of the hospital as Abby, where that just kind of got wrecked for me and I didn't feel that tension anymore. But 99% of the combat encounters really, really gripped me in a way that Last of Us just didn't.
Yeah. No, I think I definitely agree with that. I think that there is a difference between the over-the-top gore of something like Doom that is so over-the-top it's almost cartoony. And that has sort of become normalized. Like people just see Doom and it's like, oh yeah, you're ripping apart demons. It doesn't really matter. Even if you reach down their throat and rip them in half, or like Mortal Kombat, you know. But then this game, I think, is getting the criticism of being so overly violent because it isn't over the top. It only seems over the top because we're not used to media show portraying violence in such a realistic way. Like when someone gets their leg shot by a shotgun and it like blows off the bone, that is what it looks like, right? Like a video game enemy would not in any other game might fall on their knees because they got shot in the leg, but they would still have health left and they would be able to go around. But if you get shot in the leg, you're not doing anything other than worrying about your leg being missing. And that's what happens in this game because their legs go missing and then they bleed out relatively quickly. That's one of the things about the realism that is weird is if someone is bleeding out because they're missing a limb or something, they die in like 4 seconds. And that's a little weird, but that's such a nitpick that it doesn't even
Are you
register.
speaking from your experience shooting people's legs off with shotguns and watching them die in front of you?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yes. But I think that's also a testament to Naughty Dog's just animation because when you're playing with stealth, in any stealth game, using your camera is really important. So when I would grab someone as Ellie or essentially as Abby, because Abby will break someone's neck to choke him out in stealth. So
Hmm.
I'd pan the camera to make sure I'm getting somewhere safe to do this. But you pan the camera and she's got her arm around this person's neck and you see it in their eyes and you see
Yeah.
it on her face, Abby's face,
Hmm.
that like she is breaking this person's neck and killing them. The amount of attention to detail and just mastery over animation that Naughty Dog shows, I think sells this violence in a way that I've never experienced in the game. And the one that always fucking gets me is when you fight that enormous guy on the Seraphite Island at the end
Oh
as
yeah.
Abby,
The jaw thing.
and you
Oh god.
cut his mouth with that fucking sickle
Oh
sword
fuck. Dude.
like that.
My
That
dad was in the room watching me during that fight, which is a terrible part for a parent to come in on.
yeah
Because this game is incredibly violent, and we'll talk about this later. I don't want to drag on for too long, but it also has a lot of lighthearted moments and very heartwarming
yeah.
moments. My dad never came in during those. He came in during the probably the most gruesome fight in the game.
Yeah.
Um, and it's those animations that this is one of my things that I want to talk about as one of the reasons I think that this is such an impressive top of the industry game is that I remember watching the Last of Us 2 trailer from 2018 where they had that stupid thing where they have everyone in the fucking tent and the lights are the same as the
Yeah.
dance room scene and it transitions to the gameplay but then they have to reset it and it takes forever and whatever. But I remember watching that with my friend and us watching the gameplay when it transitions from the cutscene to gameplay where Ellie does things like picking up the arrows and putting them in her backpack, or doing the slide between shelves in the convenience store, or the one that always got me was her grabbing the bottle as she ran by, and it is infinitely more well animated than almost anything else we've ever seen. Like you do things in this game, and it doesn't feel like you're doing like pressing a button and having action happen. It feels like the character is doing it naturally in a way that like it blows my mind just like watching the game happen.
And I think just beyond that animation, speaking, that's a demo where she's in the convenience store, right, and fighting the Seraphites.
Yep.
I was waiting for that moment to happen because I was so impressed by that demo, and I played through the game, and then I hit that encounter and I finished it, and then I thought to myself, I was like, oh shit, I just did the encounter from E3, but I didn't play out for me how it played out in that demo. The amount of player choice there is in the combat is also, I think, on a completely different level. It's not just whether about you're going in guns blazing or with stealth. It's about how you move through your environment and how you choose to tackle things is probably so different. Like
Yeah.
if we broke down how we went through different combat encounters, I'm sure we played them entirely different because Naughty Dog isn't asking you to enter a combat sequence and just fight someone. They're asking you to enter this real scenario that you have to get through. It doesn't matter how you get through it, but you got to get through it somehow. So whether you're throwing bricks and you're sneaking around, or you're building water bottle silencers and you're using that gun that has one of the most fucking satisfying sound effects in video games, that fucking water bottle silence pistol shot, or if you're going in with a hunting rifle, it doesn't matter. There are so many options, and what's impressive is no matter what you do, you're probably fucked in some way. I had very few combat encounters where everything just went right.
Hmm.
And that's not the fault of the game because of poor enemy telegraphing. It's not the fault of me not having the skill set. Because I thought the difficulty was very reasonable throughout the game. I played on just I forget it's the suggested regular normal difficulty, but
Moderate, yeah.
yeah it's to the point that this really feels real, and you can't predict everything's gonna happen.
Yeah.
There's gonna be someone else behind that wall, or you're gonna miss that shot when you really don't need to, or it's gonna take you too long to reload, or you're not gonna have the crafting thing ready. Just something always gonna happen, and it keeps you on edge because a game I really love, Wolfenstein: The New Colossus, is a much harder shooter than this.
Hmm.
It's much more difficult, but it becomes predictable when you enter a combat encounter. Okay, I'm gonna post up behind cover. I'm gonna take out my assault rifle, then I'm gonna dual wield my schlock hammers, and I'm gonna run around the corner. I'm gonna slide. I'm gonna get through it, right? I'm gonna blow a Nazi's arm off. I'm gonna hit him with a hatchet. It's gonna be violent. But in Last of Us, you can't fall into that same kind of pattern because the combat encounters are so dynamic, and the whole game is so well designed.
Hmm.
There were a lot of times people forget how poorly designed some areas of Last of Us Part 1 were. With the
Hmm.
fucking like water raft things or not
Yeah.
knowing where to go.
Mm.
There's very little of that here.
Well, they actually make there's a couple references throughout of the
Yeah.
fact that they make fun of the fact that the first game was so limited in its gameplay. One of the things that is a there's a couple things that are staples of Naughty Dog games at this point. There
Yeah.
is the pushing the dumpster to get up
Yes.
to a wall. And then there's the having someone boost you to a ladder so that they can drop down the ladder.
Yes.
And then in the first Last of Us, there was the water, the wooden pallets in the water. Those other two things I mentioned do happen in the game. They are usually given some sort of spin where it has to deal with physics or it has to deal with the environment in a way that the other games didn't really have. But also, they're not very frequent. And also, the ladder thing happens maybe 3 times throughout the game, and that is something that I'm just because it's fine that they have it. Those were never an issue to me, but it's the fact that I realized they're used so sparingly in this that it makes so abundantly clear that this is such a better designed game, that the traversal of the world is so natural. I only got stuck/lost on like a puzzle or like escaping a room maybe 3 times, and then it was just something where I'm like, oh, I'm a fucking moron. Like it was obvious, I just wasn't looking in the right direction. But there's no Uncharted like yellow thing on a cliff. That's where you're supposed to jump to. There is boxes that you can recognize. Oh, I know I can jump up that, and then maybe I can get to here. Or maybe if because something is sticking out and it looks a little weird, I can throw a rope on it, or I can shimmy across this tiny thing. And it's those things that look so natural in the decaying environment, but because you have experienced the world and because it's so introduced to you so naturally, you know that I can traverse it like that. And it never feels like it's designed. It feels like you're actually finding your way around a world that is falling apart around you.
Yeah, I think that it just speaks to. I mean, Naughty Dog's had a ridiculous history, going from Crash Bandicoot right to Jack and Daxter, and then to Uncharted to Last of Us to where we are now. And even just looking at the progression from how they designed their games from Uncharted 1, which I've never
Mm-hmm.
been beaten because just in comparison it feels really stiff
Oh
compared
yeah,
to even 2.
that game is not even great.
No.
That game's not. I don't even think that game's good. It's definitely. I don't mind that game because it introduced me to the series, but no, not a great game.
But even like you look at not Last of Us Part 2, but yes, you look at Last of Us Part 2, but you look at Uncharted 2, which is just a high watermark
Mm.
for the third person action game. And then you look at their design here. A lot of those things like boosting people up, a lot of that's there because it hides loading screens. because the game loads in the background, that stuff happens, which is why it used to happen so much. And it still needs to happen here because this game fucking. I have a base PS4. It pushes that thing to the fucking moon.
Hmm.
Your PS4 makes a lot of noise, and this is a very intensive game. But the pacing is so elegant and the traversal is so good that they're able to mask everything. So there's no broken immersion, either because the game has to load and catch up with you, or because they're trying to get you through the world somehow by fucking spray painting white little new Super Mario Brothers looking cliff lines onto stuff you can jump onto.
Hmm.
So it's just really a testament to the fact that Naughty Dog was already just shitting down the throat of every other developer back in 2009 with Among Thieves, but they've gotten so much better than that.
Yeah.
Um, I think just I find sometimes a lot of Naughty Dog's traversal to be fun but familiar and kind of not tedious, but that's the part I zone out during, you know. Even
Hmm.
in Uncharted, I always find the strongest parts of Uncharted to be the story, the puzzles, and the combat. The
Hmm.
traversal is always fine.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the
but
traversal in Uncharted is so classically known to be linear that it's
yeah.
like it's essentially a cutscene. You're gonna hold up and press X a bunch of times.
But what's good about the traversal here is not only is it organic, but it gives you a moment to relax. Because
That's true.
when you're in the combat, you're not relaxed. Even when you're in the cutscenes, I was always on edge, especially in some cutscenes, like during that fucking farm sequence at the end. I was like, someone's about to die.
Hmm.
JJ's about to get shot. What's gonna happen? I don't know. But Naughty Dog always keeps you on edge. They're always a step ahead of you, right? But when you're just walking in the back of your mind, you always know you're about to get fucked by something or someone. It's a problem. Sometimes that person's Owen. But the point is, the point is, it feels good to just get to walk down a road in Seattle and pick up items and get a moment to relax.
Yeah.
And I think it fades into the fact that the game's pacing is strange, and you have to adjust to it, especially when you hit that when you hit the climax of the game, you think, and then you take Seattle again from Abby's perspective.
Yeah.
You have to be in the right mindset to understand and appreciate that pacing. And I want to talk about actually that specific moment because I
Let's
think
just go
that's
right into it right now.
oh my God. Okay, here's the thing about it. When that moment happened, I immediately was like, this is where they're gonna lose me. Because I was so connected to Ellie and we had such good momentum and we just came out of the horrifying aquarium sequence where you know that Mel is pregnant and you know who Owen is and you know what you're about to do. And that scene sucks. Like you see Ellie lose control. You're like, this is it. This is where the game. I've hit the end of the game. And then you took over from Abby, and I started to feel disappointed because I didn't connect with her. I didn't understand her. I didn't care. I wanted to see Ellie's quest through to the end. Um, but it didn't take long until Naughty Dog sold me on Abby and sold me on Owen and Manny and Mel and all of these characters. And I found myself connecting with them just as much, if not more, than Jesse and Dina and Ellie and all of them, right?
Yep.
And I think that's testament to the fact that Naughty Dog paced the game to tell us the story they want to tell. It's atypical in a lot of ways, but their writing is so strong, and Neil Druckmann just knows what to show, when to show it, how long to show it for, that it didn't take me very long until I was like, okay, boom, I'm Abby, and now I really care about her. And I went from the moment of, oh my God, Jesse just got killed. Like Jesse
Yeah.
is dead.
Hmm.
And if that's one point I want to talk about really quick. Um, it's really effective how Naughty Dog steps back, and character deaths usually are big deals, right? Because the story is told from a perspective, but this is told from multiple perspectives. And so when someone on Abby's side is killed by Ellie, Ellie doesn't give a shit.
Hmm.
And when Abby kills Jesse, she doesn't fucking care.
Yeah.
But you know them. You know Owen, you know Jesse. So it hurts when you watch them die, but the game doesn't care. They're like, okay,
Hmm.
and we're moving on. It
Yeah.
just speaks to the fact that Naughty Dog just wants to tell you the story they want to tell you, and they're going to tell it how they're going to tell it, and you're hands off. You're just experiencing it.
Yeah, that is something that I've had a couple long conversations on about spoiler stuff on Discord with a few friends, and one of the points that I kept bringing up is that the brutality of the game in disposing of its characters is so it's so unique compared to other games that I've played, that when they do something like just having Jesse step out of a door and his head gets blown, and the game doesn't linger on it, as you were saying. Or for me, the most powerful one is Yara, which is a character I have problems with, and I'll talk about later. But Yara's death, where she gets shot, and of course Abby and Lev are both freaking out, but they have to deal with the WLFs and Isaac. And then Yara gets revenge on Isaac, and then all the WLF just go fucking ham, and they just blast her with machine guns and stuff. And it is only shown for a few seconds, and you just hear it when it like pans back to Abby and Lev's faces. And it's so brutal, but because those people are only reacting that way because they just saw their leader get killed, this guy that they have been following for years. And so they're thinking, we just have to, we all want to get revenge right in this moment. But the game doesn't want you to think about it from their perspective. It wants you to realize that this is a brutal world, and no one gives a shit about anyone else's perspective. And I think that's what's most powerful about the game, is how much I can love its world design and its environments and things like that, but its commentary on perspective, I think is where it is the strongest. And so when people say, when someone plays through this game and still thinks that Ellie should have killed Abby, or that Abby was in the wrong, or that Joel should not have entered the room in the blizzard, I feel like they're missing the point of the game in the character growth or lack thereof. Is some characters don't change, and that's their arc, is that they're so set in their ways that they can't change until the very last moment, or that they have changed and it is their detriment. And it's really about your perspective on that arc that ends up being what your opinion is of that character.
Let's just get into it. Joel gets killed. He gets put down like a fucking dog.
Mm-hmm.
He gets shotgunned. He gets tourniqueted. And here's what's effective to me about Joel's death, because Joel's death is an incredible narrative decision.
Yep, I agree.
And it speaks, and it has the reason people don't like it has everything to do with people's own personal expectations of the characters. Not they care more about what they want the characters to do instead of what those characters do to serve a narrative and how they unfold as real people. It's the same problem people have with The Last Jedi, by the way, and I'm on the Force Awakens of my Star Wars rewatch right now, so we're going to discuss this again later. But here's the thing about Joel's death. Joel's death, you expect, based on Last of Us Part 1, you get into ridiculous situations. Like the part, I forget his name, but you go to find Joel's old friend, and you get caught in his trap, and you're fucking upside down from the ceiling of that garage, and you're shooting the clickers as they're coming towards you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're conditioned to believe that Joel is going to survive. And you're conditioned just by media in a lot of ways that your main character is not going down like this. But Joel just gets killed. It's that simple. Joel is a bad man. And his death forced me to reconsider who Joel is and what he has done. Mm-hmm. In a way that I never had to before, because Last of Us Part 1 is Joel's story, and when you tell your story, you're kind of going to paint yourself in a way that makes you sympathetic. And the first game makes Joel sympathetic, but Joel is not a sympathetic man at all.
Mm-mm.
He's done horrifying shit. And he deserved to die, and that's just how it happened. And having him be killed that way makes you think about the character that Naughty Dog has created, and makes you realize that maybe you didn't know Joel Miller, and maybe actually Neil Druckmann does. And maybe he's telling you the story of this man that you shouldn't have been rooting for. And as an audience member, you have to understand that you didn't know him. And it's not poor writing to expose something that was there the whole time.
Yeah.
It's actually very good writing that they're able to flip this character so effectively, and just by killing him, and by he doesn't have to say anything. You just have to see him fucking bloody on the ground looking at Ellie that last time before he gets his skull bashed in to know everything you have to know about Joel. And Naughty Dog does all of that without saying a single fucking line of dialogue.
Yeah.
It's an incredible sequence that I think is industry defining.
No, I would say I agree with you. I have not had very many conversations with people who didn't like the game. I've had I had a conversation, we're gonna put that in the thickest air quotes known to
All
man,
right.
with my friend who hasn't played the first game, probably won't play this game, heard the leaks, I think, watched PewDiePie play through the game or something like that, and then listened to Wood from Beat 'em Up say that he didn't like the game, and then now has the opinion that Abby was in the wrong, game is terrible, story is poorly written, all these things. And I sit there, and I'm like, all right, we're going to have a conversation about this, because he told me he wanted to talk about it when I beat the game. I'm like, all right, cool. So I beat the game. I forget to text him, but 2 days later, I said, oh shit, I forgot to text you. Here's why I think you're wrong about these things. And I fucking crack my knuckles and slap him with a thick wall of text. And I'm like, these are the points of why Joel would go into the room. Here are the points of why Abby was in the right and why she's an interesting and deep and well-written character. And his only response to the first portion of that is, I just didn't like it. And then I hit him with another wall of text. And then he ignores that and sends some Pokemon meme. And then I send him a third wall of text, and then he doesn't respond at all. And that's where we're at this moment. And I
Interesting.
feel like that there is something to be said. There are certainly people who have valid criticisms with it, and disagreeing with story choices is totally your prerogative. But when someone says that this is an objectively terrible game, that the writers didn't know what they were doing when they thought through it, I think that there's something deeper going on with someone's expectations of media, of video games, and of who they are as a person that they don't want to expose by having a deep conversation about it. So that when I try to really get into the nitty gritty of characters and themes, there's nothing to really counter it, because what I'm presenting, for at least from my perspective, and I am totally biased because I'm me and it's my perspective. But what I'm talking about is in the game and it is shown to you, and this is what the story is. So I don't know. I'm being a little passionate, but I've had an
I'm gonna
experience.
I'm gonna take my degenerate hat off, and I'm gonna put my pretentious douchebag hat on for a moment because it's
All right.
important. Um, I really believe that a lot of the criticism about this game comes from the fact that people don't want to view games as more than just games. Um, I really loved listening to a lot of Kind of Funny's Last of Us Part 2 spoiler cast and everything, especially the one, I don't know if you've listened to it, but with Troy Baker and Neil
Yeah,
Druckmann, and
that was a great.
that's it's fucking awesome. One thing that I was getting kind of tired of was Greg saying over and over again, it's more than a video game, it's a hubba dubba 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 dubba.
Mm-hmm.
He says it so much because it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Because as somebody, I'm an English major. I spend a lot of fucking time sitting in a chair with my professor and a bunch of other people talking about symbolism and theme and all of this shit, right? And taking books or even taking films in my film classes and looking behind them more. And people don't want to do that with video games. They just don't. There's a big backlash to it. And The Last of Us Part 2 is going to do more for this medium and this industry than any other game because it's going to force us to look at games in a deeper and more considered way.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is not a badly written plot. This is just the sort of plot that you don't expect to find in a video game because it's not the story that people want to tell. Film, for people, I'm sure you know that because you're also a film major, I learned. We literally we fucking text each other after our first semester of college. We're like, hey, so what are we majoring in? We're like, we found out we're majoring in the same stuff. The point is, film only became discussed and revered and important when people started treating it like literature and discussing it through a literary lens, through talking about its symbolism and its theme and talking about the characteristics of the people that create it. There's a lot of games with great stories that I think are important. Wolfenstein I think is a wonderful story. I think something like Journey has a wonderful story. There's a lot of great stories in video games, but you can't look at them in the deep and robust way you can look at Last of Us Part 2. And the fact that you can do that with this game means that Naughty Dog is getting us closer to the point where video games are going to get the respect that they deserve and that they should have gotten a while ago. And the pushback to this game's narrative is not because it's badly written, because it isn't. Because if this was in film or if this was a book, it would be fucking revered.
That is a point that I have thought about a lot. Is that I actually had this conversation with a guy who hadn't played the game but was uninterested in it because it was sort of a forced story, which I can understand that not being something that's for you, but I think that my point was that it is essentially this game, as you were getting at, is a new method of storytelling for video games, right? This is not something we're used to. You don't make decisions in this game because they are telling you a story. And the reason you are playing certain encounters and moments that would usually be a cutscene is because they want you to feel the impact of it and know that you are the one pushing this forward. You have to if you want to see how it goes. You don't sit back and have it fed to you like a book or a game. Well, I guess you can pause a movie or put down a book, but you have to actively try to push the story forward. You have to beat the enemies. You have to explore the world at your own pace, but you have to get it done. But when this game, I say, is a masterpiece in storytelling, but you don't make any narrative decisions, someone might say that it's not really a video game. But I think it's just a new type of video game storytelling, and I think it works very, very well for that.
Well, I think
It's just something that you have to get used to.
you can contrast it to Uncharted 4, which I think in a lot of ways is just as impressive from a fidelity perspective, from a writing perspective. But the difference between the narrative in Uncharted 4 and Last of Us Part 2 is that you're not challenged by the narrative in Uncharted 4. You are playing the same as in Last of Us to push it for the narrative, and you have to complete the gameplay sequences to make the story beats happen. But you don't feel challenged by the story beats that you're forcing to happen in Uncharted 4. It's a great adventure story. It's got a great story about brothers in there, but it's not difficult thematically.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like few games. This game actually makes me want to replay Red Dead Redemption 2 because I never beat that. Because I think that kind of operates in a similar lane. But the story is uncomfortable in The Last of Us Part 2, and few game stories are. So you don't recognize, I suppose, the way that you just view the way you're pushing a story differently when you're doing things that you disagree with, but you have no choice but to do them. It's very easy to complete a set piece in Uncharted 4 and then get to the story beat. It's because it's just a swashbuckling adventure. You're fucking jumping between trucks. You're jumping on Sam's bike and you're shooting an Uzi at a truck chasing you. It's fun and it's lighthearted. And you know that you're just going to go someplace pleasant with the story, even if it gets dark at some points. But when you're fighting the Seraphites and you know that whatever story beat's coming, you've enabled Ellie to do something that you viscerally, morally disagree with. That challenges your relationship as a player to a story in a way that Naughty Dog's and the entire industry's games just haven't before.
Yep. I took a course in the past semester, which this sounds like a joke, but it's not. Is that I took a class called Video Games and Society, which sounds like a joke. It sounds like a Joker meme. It sounds like a fucking Joker meme, but it was a real class. And what we went through was a lot of things about the history of narrative and portrayal of certain groups and of violence and of sexuality and things like that in video games. And I am just now realizing this as we are discussing it. I wish I'd taken that class a semester later because we would have a fucking week where we talked about this game. Like, maybe not because spoilers or because it's too gory or whatever, but at least we would have a day where we tackle narrative and we talk about how this game changes the player's perception to their character. Because we did talk about that, and it was something about making decisions in video games and how human psychology relates to that. But how this game, as you were saying, challenges your perception of what a character can do and what you as a player are making them do. And I think that is very, very interesting. Now, we've spent a long time on this. I'm going to whip open my notes. We're going to crack our knuckles and we're going to get into something else. Because Well, we're taking off our pretentious hats and we're going to go back to talking about a fucking video game.
My
Because
degenerate hat is back on.
while this is a great piece of literature and media, it's also a great fucking video game. And there's a
It's
lot
true.
of great game design in there. My personal favorite aspect of the game, although I love the characters and I think the animation's so impressive, the thing that blew me away the most was what am I trying to say? The variety in the environmental design. Is this game primarily takes place entirely in one city, but it never feels like it's in one city. And this is the reason that I feel like the Bo's first game out of the water so much. It's because the first game is mostly just abandoned houses. You're going through suburban towns. There's not a lot of variety in the environment. But this game, for the first half of the game, it's still sort of the same theme as it was the first game with, grassy fields and trees and overgrown, whatever. But as you get to like a third of the way through the game, it starts hitting you with area after area of visually unique, creatively designed, varied locations that could be an entire game in themselves. And every time I got into a new area and the placement of the enemies and the design of the collectibles and stuff like that was so varied between the places, and you had to figure out on the fly what you're going to do. Because is this place vertical? Are things falling down? Is there water involved? Like, what sort of thing do you have to keep in mind while traversing a new area? And I thought that was really, really interesting.
I think what's effective about that environmental diversity is the way that this game has very few traditional Naughty Dog set pieces. There's a couple of them, but what it replaces them with, I think, is something that's way better and fits the overall aesthetic of Last of Us Part Two way more, which is these just striking locations that that make you feel something and make you explore them in a particular way, but don't feel out of place. Like I think when Jesse rescues you and you're in the Jeep, that felt out of place to me. There were a
Yep.
couple sequences in the game that and I'm sure we'll touch on our problems a little bit later. But like when you go into, I think it was was it the TV broadcasting place where the Seraphites have lynched all those people?
Yeah.
I think something like that it's a set piece, but not in an atypical way. So I totally agree with you because it didn't click with me that yeah, the game takes place in Seattle. Like you go to the Seraphites Island, but it's that one location. But whether you go into the aquarium or whether you're going into these gross buildings where the infected have taken over, or you're on the street or you're in the wherever you are, it really does feel unique and fun, and it feels it feels gamey in the sense that traversal stays interesting and engaging, but without breaking the immersion of the fact that you're still in Seattle.
Yeah. I think that there's something to be said of the game design is that the reason this game feels so different from other games is because they don't, I mean, aside from weapons, they don't introduce new mechanics. You have all your traversal options from the beginning. You don't get the grappling hook or the new whatever. Yeah, you find a bow or then you find a flamethrower or whatever, but you're not upgrading your character in a way to unlock the ability to get somewhere new. Ellie and Abby are people, and they can do what people can do. And the way that the game spices things up from level to level, instead of introducing a new traversal mechanic, well, I mean, sometimes they do, like the boat or whatever, but is that they change the environment around the character. And the character, you have to use your character's abilities to get around. So when you, just one that weirdly stands out to me is sort of in the last third of the game. There's a fight with some Seraphites with you and Lev, where you're fighting in I think an apartment building that has been split down the middle, and you have to jump across this gap every time you want to like make a loop up the building, and it's that simple change in the environment. This is an apartment building. You've been in fucking 20 apartment buildings in this game before. But as soon as you hit this area, you have to completely reconsider how your traverse works because everything's at an incline because the fucking building is falling down. So you have to say, you have to like point up and cover works differently, and if you jump across, someone can shoot you from below or from above because there's now this giant gap. And I think that that's so interesting, is that they just change everything. And even if it does seem like a usual locale, like a beach or or an apartment building, they give it something to spice it up that just makes it feel so much more unique.
I think the other thing they do with they really do put the environments uh, as the central focus of the gameplay in another important way, which is with the resources. Usually, I fucking hate crafting systems and resource-based systems in games that feel like they don't need them. And it felt superfluous to me in The Last of Us Part 1, actually. But here it really doesn't, because like when you're in there's that great apartment sequence, but there's also a sequence where you're fighting seraphites in some buildings, but then up on a highway. And it's a destroyed highway, and there's trucks and everything that you can get under and go around. And there's bricks and bottles. You really do need to use everything to your environment, because when the game gives you 2 rounds for your pistol, and you have 1 arrow for your bow, and you're down to the bare minimum, maybe you have a Molotov or a stun grenade or something, the environment becomes so much more important. It doesn't just become window dressing, and it doesn't just become something to traverse through. It becomes a weapon you have to use in itself. And I feel like that doesn't happen all the time. You can get, in a lot of games, you get great visual variety, which give you some new strategic options, but they don't feel intrinsically necessary. But by throttling what you have at your disposal and giving you so few tools on your character side to work with, you really do need to care about where you are in a different way and consider spatial awareness in a way you don't usually have to. So I'm glad you brought up the environments, because I wouldn't have thought about them really in this way.
Well, that's what the back and forth is for. All right, so let's move on to something else. Why don't you choose a topic? Choose a topic.
Let's talk a little bit about flashbacks. And let's talk about probably okay, I hate flashbacks in basically any medium. The year didn't start out on a great foot with flashbacks with the fucking Baby Sonic sequence at the beginning of Sonic the Hedgehog. 2020 was not going to be the year of the flashback. But then you get Last of Us Part 2 in your hands, and you see flashbacks being used correctly. And I think the most elegant example of them is Ellie's birthday, when you go to the museum and Joel takes her to the space portion. And I found myself, usually I want to just get through a flashback because I find that they break up the pace of a narrative too much. And they do here because they're fairly extensive, but Naughty Dog makes them these really interesting points of contrast to whatever's happening. They offer context, but more than context, they offer a different feeling in the player than you're getting in the main course of the narrative. It feels almost like a complete non sequitur to go to Ellie's birthday party at the museum and go into the shuttle and give her, the tape. By the way, that tape probably should have gotten destroyed when they went swimming. I'm just gonna say it. That bothered me. But the point is, Naughty Dog gave you these moments of happiness and levity when the rest of the narrative isn't providing that. So between the contrast and just how effectively written they were, I loved the flashbacks.
Yeah, that's something that I consistently thought of throughout the game, and is something that I like to consider when talking about the overall narrative and the design of it. Is that not only do the flashback sequences provide a new location, a new point in time, so it can spice things up from a visual and character perspective, but they also are so well timed in the story, where it's like, I think it's about almost every time you finish up a day, you get a new flashback, and it can be in any point of time of the characters. It can be in essentially any point in the world, barring like another country. But is that the narrative threads throughout the game require you to reconstruct the narrative because it is not linearly told. So you always have to be paying attention to things. And I think this is something that I only really came to grips with as I was finishing up the game is that the characters' arcs are told in a nonlinear fashion, so that Joel entering the room at the beginning and getting killed might not make sense to some people. But if you pay attention to all the flashbacks and you listen to the story that is being told of his character arc that happened before that, after that in the scope of the game, but before that in chronologically, that's how his character arc is told. He has over the years become a softer person. He has tried to change up his lifestyle because he was alienating those that he loved. Tommy left him completely in the first game for a long time, and he was pushing away Ellie, and they hadn't talked for a long time because he was such a violent and not approachable person. So Joel has over the course of the years started getting back into his interest, playing guitar, doing wood carving, all these things. He has become a more trusting person, being a member of the community in Jackson. So it actually does make sense for him to save a girl in Abby when she's being chased by a horde, and then have that moment where they have to work together and ride on a horse together, and then he builds that trust with her that he would not have in the first game. But because he has had this arc in the background that is told across the entire course of the game, it actually does make sense. And with Abby, because it's told non-linearly, you have the disconnect from her when you initially play as her, when it reaches her half of the game. And you might think, I'm playing as the villain. This is such a weird decision. What the fuck are they doing? But once you are able to learn who she is from her perspective and what her life has been like and what her motivations are, it completely gives the first half of the game a new context. And I'm doing New Game Plus right now. I'm trying to go for the platinum, and I am... Oh, geez, where am I in the game? I just finished up re-exploring downtown Seattle. So I'm only 3 hours in. But re-watching the Joel's death scene and hearing... And in the sequence between Abby and Owen, when you don't know who they are, when they're leaving the Overlook, there's so much in the dialogue that you can understand now that you've been given context. There's so much in the glances that they give each other that Tommy mentions Joel and Tommy's name when they first save Abby, and from that moment forward, you can see the gears in her head turning. She's like, what a fucking coincidence. This is what we're here for. I will end up killing this man, but he just saved my life, and I'm going to have to protect him in order to save my own ass. And it's such an interesting moment to be able to look back on now that you're given more context. And so it might feel weird at first, but you need to look at the game as an overall package and the story being told non-linearly, fusing it together in your head. And it really, really works as an entire package, even if some of the parts might seem out of place.
I think what else is effective about it, and I'm going to embed it, a ridiculously hot take 58 minutes into this discussion. Non-linear storytelling often doesn't work for me. I don't think Pulp Fiction is structured particularly effectively because stories that are told out of order, like Pulp Fiction, sometimes feel like it's more of a novelty. Because I think non-linear storytelling is most effective when it makes you feel something and then reevaluate how you feel upon new information. Bless you.
Hiccup.
Well, I didn't know what to say for hiccup, so I got nervous. But the bottom line is, nonlinear storytelling is most effective when it makes you feel something and then reevaluate how you feel. I had to put my controller down when you realize who Abby is, and you realize that her dad is the doctor.
That is my final point, or one of my final points in my notes. And I remember you reading this, and I don't know if you really thought I was being serious or if I was exaggerating, is that the game left me with my jaw hanging open quite a few times. Is because not only were you forced to do things like the fight in the theater between when you're playing as Abby and you have to hunt down Ellie, and I feel like I don't want to do this because I don't want to have to attack Ellie. And you see her beat Ellie's face and Lev shoot Dina. And I'm sitting there like, fuck, this is really intense. I've never experienced something like this in a game. Or the moment when, after the zebra sequence, when Abby's dad has to go back, and you realize that he was the doctor from the end of the game, and I'm sitting there like, they fucking thought this out so well. It makes sense, and I'm sitting there like, they're so much smarter than me. They put this together in such a fucking crazy way, and I'm just sitting there like, oh my god, because I'm just blown away by the narrative decisions.
Yeah, it's a very smartly told story, and I found myself with a lot of those moments too. For me, it was killing Mel and Owen, specifically
Mm-hmm.
killing Mel. Jesse getting his head blown open. Um, and then when you figure out who Abby is. But the most affecting moment for me was the ending. Now, I've got a question for you. Do we want to save the ending for what we want to talk about last and then talk about the game on a bigger scale? Because one thing I do want to touch on, though, is I do have some issues with the game. And you brought up something that you really liked that I didn't. Do you want to talk about problems for a little bit? Because that
Yeah,
was more
sure.
of a compliment sandwich, because I don't want to end on a sour note.
Yeah, let's go
Here's the
for
thing.
it.
There were several moments throughout the game where I felt Naughty Dog lean too heavily into gamey elements or were too impressed by themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
what I mean is there's a couple examples. I'll talk about the gamey elements. We can talk about that. Then I'll talk about whether they're too impressed with themselves because it's a weird thing. Actually, I want to talk about this first because it fucking bothers me. There are so many sequences where they're so impressed that they were able to make a fucking extension cord flop around like it does in real life. That you fucking throw extension cords all over the place in this game. So that was the one thing where I felt like Naughty Dog was like, we know it's cool that this cord looks like it does in real life. Like you've held an extension cord, you've coiled one up, you've thrown it, and it's a very impressive
Why would you have
moment.
thrown a fucking extension cord?
I I don't even want to get into it. But the thing is, it's like it's impressive. I get it, but things like that, or things like breaking the windows because that's a really impressive and satisfying thing too, watching the glass shatter. I did feel like there were some tropes from a gameplay perspective that they leaned a little bit too heavily into repeating, just for the sake of not padding out the runtime, but showing like this is what we can do, which
Yeah.
did frustrate me a little bit. I mean, that's a minor thing because four extension cord sequences is 15 minutes out of a 30-hour game. But when a game is this good, I kind of do hone in on the things that are more annoying. But the thing that really did bother me that I actually want to discuss more than the fucking extension cords is the fight where you play as Abby against Ellie, uh, the fight where you go after that big fucking thing in the basement of the hospital. Those I think are the two big moments for me that took me out of the experience because they felt really gamey in comparison to the rest of the experience. That felt very organic. Having a forced stealth sequence where you're fighting Ellie and you can fuck it up so easily, and you have very few options. Like you really do need to follow a pretty if A then B, if B then C, if C then D, or if E then F, like to figure out, okay, she goes that way, so I'm gonna go this way. I'm gonna grab the bottle, hit her, boom, next phase. Or
Yeah.
the fight where you're literally just training this big fat fucker on the basement of the hospital, and it's very gamey in the sense that okay, I'm gonna make him follow me, and I'm just gonna lead him in a loop, and I'm gonna pick up things, I'm gonna stop to heal when I can, I'm gonna shoot it and keep moving. I felt like those were just not effective ways to get those beats across. And they were pretty smart for a lot of the times about these important beats that they want to take control away from the player for, or give them control for being smart about that. Like when you're going after Nora and you chase Nora, and then you have to hit square to beam her with the pipe a couple times. But they're intentional with what you play and what you don't. I felt like they did make a misstep, at least for me, in those two moments where it just didn't work for me.
Yeah, no. And I can understand that. And actually, looking back, I understand what you're saying, and I find that I might agree more looking back, and I will let you know once I get to those sections in my replay. But those both worked for me in the moment. I really liked the Rat King fight. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's the thing from the end of Inside. I don't know how they got away with that, but it just totally is. Um, but I thought that was fun. I really like the concept behind it. Like this the infected and the spores and the fungus has been festering in this fucking basement for 30 years, and over time The walls have become more overgrown, and the creatures are sort of like melding into one as it like joins back into nature, and it's been there since day zero. I thought that was a really cool concept, and I had a fun time with the fight. But when I replay it, if I find issues, I'll let you know, and I understand what you're saying. Um, I think the thing is with the sections that do feel more what I could put as classically Naughty Dog, as in their set piece moments that you have to run through or do a video gamey fight, is that they're so few and far between that it was almost like these are the roots. It's okay that they have a little bit of it in there.
Yeah.
So I personally didn't have issues with them, and I honestly I don't really know if there were many sections of the game that I had a problem with. Most of my issues with the game, I don't know how I want to phrase this. One of my biggest problems with the game is that the Seraphites don't get the attention that the WLF and the Jacksonites do. I wish there had been a little more in depth, or a little more discussed about their history and what life is like from their perspective. Because it is weird in a game all about perspective to have a group that is essentially like almost everything they do seems evil, right? Like they have this prophet that they follow that they've sort of twisted the words on, and I think that the concept of the prophet and the religion based around it is cool, but we've only known the Seraphites as these people who have twisted the words and not as like this group that has an end goal. And I thought that was a little weird. And by extension, I was not a huge fan of Yara as a character. I feel like she didn't get enough development and personality compared to the rest of the cast. Um, Yara was a little bit flat. Although as I said, I thought her death was impactful. But another thing is Mel. I don't think Mel was given enough personality and discussion, because she was sort of just like a tag on for Owen, and then also she was with you in that sequence with Manny. Manny's great, by the way. I love Manny. But Mel, I think, is a special case, and I'm okay with it because she and Abby were already distanced. Like that's part of their relationship, is that they've had a hard time talking to each other. So their stilted relationship sort of shows through in how much you learn about Mel. But I do wish she had had a little bit more, especially considering how strong the supporting cast is in this game. When you have Tommy, who I think could have had a little more screen time, but he got his screen time in the first game, so it's okay. But Dina and Jesse are so interesting, and Owen and Manny and Lev are so interesting, and then of course Ellie and Abby, that the couple sort of soft spots just really stuck out to me.
I actually, I agree with some of your things, especially about Mel and Yara. I disagree with the Seraphites though, because I appreciated the way that you could learn about who the Seraphites were in very organic and interesting ways. So, for instance, going back to that apartment fight you're talking about, when you start that encounter, for me, when I started almost all of those encounters, I would get down in the grass and I would kind of try to figure out as much as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And if you would stay there and listen, you would hear Seraphites talking. So there's a bunch of different conversations you could hear. Like you hear one where there's two Seraphites talking about how one of this guy, his child died somehow, and now I forget the word for it, but their one of their holy figures was giving them a new child.
The elders.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the elder was giving him a new child, but the wife wasn't ready for it yet. But they're talking about how it's a big blessing and everything, right, to get this. So I actually appreciated learning this information in a secondhand manner, whether it's through that or it's through talking to Lev and through inference or through picking up little snippets of what he says.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked that, and I think by extension, I really liked the subplot about Lev being transgender,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought it was really tastefully done in the sense that one thing they talked about in the kind of funny discussion is that someone had wrote in and said that they were uncomfortable with the concept that people were using Lev's name before he transitioned, which I think was Rose or
Lily.
Ruby, Lily, or something like that. Um, but it
They
was
only
interesting.
did that for like one section for a couple seconds. So
and I thought
I
it was a
understand that you didn't
yeah.
remember it. Is what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
it was effective because I like the way that they show the values of the Seraphites in this secondhand manner, and the way you realize who Lev is through this combat sequence where you go, why are they calling him Lily? And now why did he cut his hair? And why is that now a big deal? And then you meet the mother and you realize actually what happened. And I think what I liked about it is that's not who Lev is to me. Lev is not just a side plot about this kid who's transgender. Lev is this really interesting and strong character who made this choice for himself that you learn about again in a non-linear fashion. It's not the first thing you learn about Lev. It's not, hey, I'm Yara and here's my transgender brother and we're escaping, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the way they unfolded and talked about these really important and interesting and confusing topics, especially if you have no real life experience with it or know anyone who's dealt with that, I thought it was really interesting the way that Naughty Dog portrayed it, and I thought it was all very effective. And learning it through Abby's filter and trying to recognize as Abby, okay, what's actually happening here? I thought that made that plot line really interesting, and it's part of why I get so frustrated when people are like, "This is an SJW game,"
Hmm.
because it just presents people who have these interesting and diverse backstories as people who also have these choices that make them different.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really good.
Two comments on what you just said is that I think the reason I'm personally I honestly don't have too much of a problem with it, but I wish that the Seraphites had more discussion. Is that I found them so interesting. I thought that the sky bridges and
Yeah,
all the wooden stuff and their culture of the elders and the twisting of the prophet and the constant graffiti of an imagery and the notes that you can read that are like pinned up. I thought those were all so cool that I wanted to know more about it, and I was only put off because they didn't dive into it as
yeah,
deep as they did for the other factions. And then my point, a point on what you were just saying, is that I have not had a conversation with someone that is outwardly or about this game that is outwardly against the usage of the main character being lesbian and having a bisexual girlfriend, or and then having a very muscular girl with a transgender male sidekick, essentially. Is those are the big parts of the game. And for me, I haven't had a conversation with someone who was outwardly against that, but I do think that was a part of the leaks, obviously Ellie, but part of the leaks that you'll be playing as characters that are usually considered SJW. I haven't had a conversation about that, but I think that that is probably a good portion of the people who haven't played the game but still shit on it is because they have an inward bias against things like that and think it's forced. But because in the game when you play it, it's not forced. These are characters that are diverse in their backgrounds, and it makes them more interesting because of that. They're not interesting because that not because they have diverse backgrounds, but because of who that made them as a person. And it allows the cast to be more different from each other, which inherently makes the characters more interesting. Because if they were all more similar, it would be more boring. And I think that's something that why I like this game so much more than its predecessor is thinking back is there's not a lot of memorable characters from the first game. Like except for now that how like now what I know about Tommy, I wouldn't even consider Tommy an interesting character from the first game. It's really Joel, Ellie, and then Sam and his older brother are kind of interesting, but not there for too long. And then there's like Bill, who is sort of there, but you don't learn that much about him. They do such a good job of having a solidly set up, relatively large group of characters, which is why I enjoyed this game so much.
yeah. Um, I don't think I really have much more to say to that point.
Yeah,
But I think it just also speaks to me how disappointed I am that people aren't going to play it and just read things on paper. Because
yep.
to be fair, I do think that our industry does have a big problem with tokenism.
Hmm.
I think that is a big problem, um, depending on where you look. But I think this is such a wonderful example of of just showing people who are different and showing people who have experiences that I'll never understand.
Yeah.
But making you relate to them and understand them, and just they're just people. And it's refreshing to see in a game, almost like playing Celeste, which is along a similar line, has a really refreshing depiction of mental health. It's just interesting to see these people who have different backstories and come from different places just be presented in such an elegant and organic way. And it just frustrates me to see Naughty Dog get shit for being, oh, woke, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Yeah.
Because they're including things that are, again, like the narrative structure, not typically handled in our medium.
Yeah.
So I was really refreshed by that. Um, I want to talk about everything that happens after the farm,
Okay.
or when you get to the
The
farm.
the Santa Barbara trip.
Yeah, I want to talk about basically getting to the farm and then through the rest of the game. Do you have
Yeah.
anything you want to say before we get to that?
Um.
Because I still want to talk about like big picture stuff at the end, but like
Hold on.
up to this point in the journey.
One quick thing. So to sort of bring up some levity before we go to the end, which is usually it's a pretty depressing section. Is what I have written down in my notes is that this game takes the giraffe moment from the first game and stretches it out. Still keeps it thick. It's not as no. I don't think any one giraffe moment in this game is as impactful as the giraffe moment was in the first game because it was such a unique moment in that game. But when the you have the zebra sequence, you have the exploring the aquarium for the first time and discovering Max's room and learning about that, and then talking about the seal and finding the seal, and then of course the Ellie's birthday, and even to some extent the weed room sequence, like all this
Yeah.
stuff that is just the people in a harsh world having a good time and finding the beauty in nature and each other. I think that it was so well done to be able to keep the game being an emotional roller coaster. Like we would go from the darkest moment straight into Ellie and Joel goofing around, right? And I thought that that was so well handled, the bright moments versus the dark, that
Yeah.
I'm glad they made the choices that they did, and it makes it all a little more impactful. It was just fun.
Do you see that?
Thumbtack.
Yes, it's a pin. I want to put a pin in what you just said.
Okay.
And I want to return to it at the end of the discussion. I'm not going to comment just yet. I'm going to put
All
that
right.
back. That's
Sounds
holding up
good.
my very cool Yoda poster.
Let's get to the what I wrote in my note as the fake out. Right. You think honestly, I thought the game was over when we hit the farm, right? Personally. And then having to go back out into the world, into a whole new location with a new group to have to deal with and new environments, and have to sort of get another perspective on what the world is like. I thought that was really interesting, and I'm very glad they made that choice.
Here's what I'll say about it. When the farm happened, I was really terrified that something was going to go heinously wrong. Because one of the leaks I heard was that Ellie dies in the game.
Yeah, which is
So,
not it's not true.
yeah. So I
She's one of the
really,
few characters who survives.
yes.
There are
So,
there are 5 characters who survive this fucking game: Ellie, Dina, Lev, Abby, and Tommy, and
yeah.
then JJ. But
I really want a team up game where you play as Nathan Drake's daughter and JJ on a universe colliding adventure.
well, Nathan Drake's daughter would be a fucking old lady by the time JJ is old enough to go adventuring.
Well, the point is, so I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I thought the farm was really effective, especially that PTSD sequence was really
Yeah.
effective. Um, I want to draw a wonderful comparison here to a film you don't like very much. Well, you appreciate its quality, but you don't personally connect with. That's Goodfellas. The last leg of Last of Us Part Two reminded me a lot of the last act of Goodfellas. Uh, and here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Strap in for this one. When I hit the farm, I thought the game was over. I hit the farm probably 11 o'clock at night, and then the game wasn't over, so I just kept playing.
Same thing happened to me.
Yeah,
I was like, all right, I'm gonna finish the game tonight, and then my dad's like, oh, I thought you were done. I'm like, no, apparently there's more.
yeah, so I mean I played it and probably finished around like 2 in the morning because it's a couple more hours after that. But the point is, it feels purposefully too much. The ending feels too much. What's really effective about the ending of Goodfellas, if folks have ever seen that film, is that it's edited. The last act of that movie is edited completely different than the first two acts because Henry Hill, the main character played by Ray Liotta, is high on coke for the end of that movie,
Yep.
and as an audience member, you feel that his time is up, and this is too long. We're past the point of no return. He's high on coke. He's out of his mind. Things are falling apart, and all you can do is recognize that this has gone on too long, but you have to push through it. When Ellie leaves, when she has a conversation with Dina, and Dina says, "Don't do this to me. Don't leave me again. I've followed you down this path once. I can't follow you again." And Ellie leaves. I felt that same thing that I felt watching Goodfellas, which is one of the best films of all time. Tucker. But
Good movie. Like that movie.
yeah, the point is, you feel a similar thing because the Rattler sequence didn't have to happen. And I'm not saying that from the sense that from a game design perspective, for me being disappointed that it shouldn't have happened because it was too long. From a narrative perspective, it didn't have to happen, and that's why it's such a good ending. Because you recognize what Ellie is doing is wrong, and we're done, but we're going back.
Mm-hmm.
This shouldn't fucking happen. But you have to go, and it's brutal. That the Rattler sequence is really tough.
Yeah.
From when she gets stuck with that tree branch to
Fuck.
killing that guy she didn't have to kill, all of that, it was too much. But that's why it was effective because it weighs on you having to go through that and see Ellie basically dead, and then looking for Abby up on those pillars on the beach, and I couldn't find her. And then Ellie's like, "Oh, over there." So I turned the camera, I'm like, "Oh my God."
Yeah. Same thing happened to me. I get to this beach. It's a beach, and then you hit the beach, and it gets foggy. And I had forgotten that they had called it the Pillars. Right
Yeah.
there's the prisoners that you help escape, who two of which the main ones are voiced by Matt Mercer and the guy who's Matt Willingham or Travis Willingham, who's Thor in the new Avengers game,
Oh.
and Matt Mercer who's McCree in Overwatch.
That's not as
Um,
good though as fucking Badger from Breaking Bad playing the fat kid in Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's a total non sequitur.
um, I had forgotten that they had mentioned that, oh, she's probably by the pillars. And I get to this beach and I'm like, I'm going to head to the beach. I'm going to go somewhere else and I'm going to find. I didn't know what I expected. I probably some fucking Roman pavilion. But then the pillars are essentially these fucking slave owners crucifying people. And there's these
Yeah.
sticks in the fog with bodies hanging on them. And that's another moment where my fucking mouth hung open. I'm like, oh fuck. And I'm like, all right, well, Abby's not one of these people. So I don't even bother looking up. I'm going through, I'm trying to find the fucking exit. There's this path that goes up a hill, but you can't go up it, and there's like an invisible wall, and I'm like, what the fuck, game? So I turn around, I'm like, oh, there's a little step. You gotta go up the step. But you can't go up the step because Ellie's hurt. So I go up the step. Can't get up the step. I turn around, I'm like, all right, I glitched the game. This is it. Bye, Last of Us 2. But then I see the fucking triangle prompt just like off in the distance. I'm like, oh fuck. And you go up, and it doesn't even look like Abby at first. And I think that's what you were getting at. Is she's so different from the strong character that we've seen for hours and hours and hours that it's a shocking moment.
Yeah. That moment really hurt because you expect, I mean, it's a meme now, but this fucking enormous muscular woman, but it's this skinny, atrophied, short cut hair, just broken person up on this pillar. And then you cut her down and you go to the boats and you think Ellie is done.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes and threatens Lev and says, "We're fighting right here." And when I did the fight, I tried to let Abby win. I didn't, the first time I played it, I didn't know what was going to happen. I still thought that Ellie was gonna die, and part of me just really just didn't want to kill Abby. And I figured I want to let the chips fall where they may, but you gotta win the fight. And that was tough to do.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, that was a great moment. I also think that I don't think that the end sequence, the last cutscenes that probably took 6 or 7 minutes or whatever, with Ellie returning to the farm and then flashback with Joel and then leaving the farm. That didn't hit me as hard as other people are saying. I think you texted me and said literal tears at the
I was
end.
actually crying at the end.
It didn't hit me as hard. I thought it was a good ending, but I didn't get the emotional impact. Um, so for me, the real ending is the battle with Abby, and then that's sort of just like an extra deal. I guess it is considered the epilogue, like in the fucking chapter list.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was still good. Just for some reason didn't hit me as hard as I was expecting.
Yeah.
But go fucking gush about it if you need to.
Um, It smells like something's burning. I have a hot pad on my back. I don't know if something's on fire. We look good. We're doing all right. Well, my back's not doing all right, but nothing's on fire. I just felt fucking smoldering plastic. Um, but I found the ending to be really impactful, and this is what I'm gonna take. Remember that pin I took out of my wall and threatened you with?
Uh-huh.
I want to pull that back out now because the ending for me solidified something that I viscerally disagree with in a lot of critique, not even negative, but just general discussion about the game, is that the game is about hate or it's about analyzing revenge or any of that. Because for me, the game is really about the fatal extremes of love in any
Yep.
regard. And
Yep.
I don't think I think thinking the game is about hate is a complete misread. And I think it was really interesting to see a story that depicts this stuff that love will take you to do. And whatever we're talking about, a moment that really hit me is after you kill Mel, which is a reprehensible thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you come back and Ellie is ruined and she takes her shirt off and you see that she's fucked up and Dina just holds her.
Mm-hmm.
Like that to me is what this game is about. She killed Mel because she fucking loves Joel more than anything. And then Dina holds Ellie after she's committed this unforgivable act because she loves Ellie.
Yeah.
And the ending for me, knowing what Joel did for Ellie, and knowing that he died on bad terms, but Joel being emotional about the possibility that Ellie might forgive him. Just the whole game, I think, is personal in a way that I don't think any other game is. And nothing in our lifetimes is going to put us in situations like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can find something in that story that means something to you.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was a really important and really impactful and really interesting story to tell. I think that ending capped it off perfectly. And like you're talking about that nonlinear narrative structure made me feel for Joel, but then recontextualized that and made me feel even more. And it just left me feeling stunned by what Naughty Dog implicitly tells its audience about loving somebody throughout that entire story, which on the surface looks like it's so dark and it's just about hate, but it is not at all.
Yeah. That's a pretty good, poignant, deep point. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Um, we could talk about how deeply unsettled I am by all of these mocap gifs that Naughty Dog keeps posting on Twitter, like fucking Joel drinking coffee or like thumbing up or like dancing around. But no, I think about the actual game. My favorite game of all time. A fucking masterpiece in every respect. I don't have anything else to say.
No, I don't really either. I think that it's very interesting how the advertising team, I mean, just the social media teams that are behind this game are just having a fucking heyday with it.
They deserve it.
Retweeting all sorts of fucking fan art, and before the game coming out, doing like a countdown with like, as you were saying, like the characters doing weird fucking shit. Like,
Yeah.
it's like the reanimations of TF2 characters doing weird shit. Like they're just fucking around, and honestly, I love it. And looking back, I'm very excited to platinum this game. I have completed collecting. I got a lot of the trophies on my first playthrough.
Yeah.
I explored all of downtown Seattle. I got all the fucking saves except for one, and I know where the other safe is. I watched it and then I accidentally got pulled in the cutscene. I'm like, oh fuck. Um, I fully upgraded a weapon. I'm pretty close on. I don't. There's a lot of coins I didn't find. The coins,
Yeah.
that was crazy. I have no idea where they are. The trading cards, those are great collectibles. That was fun. Love those. But I can't wait to play more of this game. I'm definitely gonna take it in a more casual path. When I go for a platinum on a game, it's usually after I've like sort of deeply analyzed it and spent a lot of time on it, like I have with this one. So I'm gonna put it down to very light. I'm gonna turn off the sound, put on a podcast, pull up a guide for the collectibles, and just zone out. But as I get to big moments, I'm gonna gear back in and try to get my secondary perspective on the game now that I've fully played it. So I think it'll be a fun journey.
I think that's really interesting because I'm not going to replay it for a long time. I'll come back to it when it's the right time again. But what I got out of this game was so resonant and so impactful that I'm done for now. I'll probably never get the
Yeah,
platinum.
no.
I'll do a second playthrough eventually, but not now. I got what I needed to out of this game, and it's my favorite game of all time. And when what the game was saying and talking about and making you feel when I want to feel that again, when it's that time, I'll be back in. But for now, got Animal Crossing to play.
It's
Ghost of
true.
Tsushima in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All right.
yeah,
Well, thank you very much for listening to what's probably our longest discussion. Right,
probably.
rightfully so. Rightfully so. I have been consuming as much content about this game as I can, just because I think it's so interesting to hear people discuss it. I personally, if you're interested, for more content, I would recommend the many the obscene amount of Last of Us Part 2 content that kind of funny has put out in the last
Specifically
2
with
weeks.
Troy Baker and Laura,
Yeah,
and not who
yeah,
is it?
but
Ashley
spoiler
Birch,
free. No, Ashley Johnson.
Ashley Johnson.
Um, and Neil Druckmann.
Yes.
Um, they have a spoiler-free review. They have
Yeah.
a spoiler review, both featuring Christine Steimer for What's Good Games. They have Greg interviewing, as you said, Troy Baker, Ashley Johnson, and Neil Druckmann. And then lots of the recent PS I Love Yous have been about the game. So there's a lot to dig into from them. Don't go on Twitter and talk about it. That'll get you nowhere. Find someone whose opinion you trust if you want to talk about it. Both of our Twitters are in the description, and we're trustworthy. Trust us. We're trustworthy.
We're certainly trustworthy.
Yeah. We would never lie to you. Trust us.
And Tucker needs more followers, so you'll follow him.
I do need more followers, and I need more action on my tweets.
It just in general needs more action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening, and play Last of Us 2. Tell your friends to play Last of Us 2. I really hope you didn't listen to this if you haven't played the fucking game already.
And if you have played it and you're looking for something of an equal caliber, but with a different aesthetic and feel and impact and importance, play Star Fox 64.
I think that's a good note to end our Last of Us Part 2 discussion on. So,
I think
bye.
so. See ya.